we've had like a couple good talks the past 2 weeks. We had Hugo from Propel Land and Sharvi Shetty. And now today I'm excited to bring you Cyril Ebersweiler from Hacks. I had the chance to hear one of his colleagues, Benjamin Jaffe, talk last year at Jacobs. And like his analysis of the hardware startup world was something I had never really gotten before, because they at Hacks is a hardware accelerator. And so Cyril will talk a little bit about that in his life. So I reached out to Ben after he had talked, and he said Cyril could come and talk for the Newton Lecture Series, so I'm excited to have him here. Cyril describes himself as, it's pretty funny, as a visionary punk, and also he matches that with like the things he's done professionally. He's advised some of the top hardware startups here in the Silicon Valley. So if you read about Cyril online, he's commonly quoted for anything related to US and China and the startup mix between the two countries. One of the quotes I read online is, "The next big company will come from the perfect blend between the US and China." So I just will want to open it up to Cyril, and I hope that in this lecture he is able to display the great work he has done and show us a great new future with hardware. So thanks.
All right. Hey everyone, you can hear me fine, no problem? All right, so let's get started with my little fun adventures. I've been requested to talk about me, which is probably what I can do best, I guess. A bit about what I do as well these days. So I'll take you through two little presentations, one that looks terrible and the other one is the corporate one that looks great. It's the first one is about my personal life, as much as of interest that might be to you or not. I think what's interesting is, obviously I've been in these kind of rooms in my past a long time ago, and listening to stories about where people go in their lives is interesting and important. Gives you a bit of a perspective about what you can do, and it's generally very unexpected. So, first of all, since we're not here to only do serious things, I've put some cute animal pictures over there, just to like this one, for example. Anybody knows what it is? Excellent, axolotl. Yeah, they are cute, aren't they? And there are also really, really terrible pictures of me over there. So do not do anything with them, please, and keep it for your eyes only. Oh, damn, they are really cute. My name is Cyril. This is a picture I took in Shenzhen, actually, with one of my favorite shirts from a few years back. And this is all me here doing silly things with, brain sensing devices. This is called a Neko Mimi. I don't know if any one of you has ever actually had one, but it moves the ears on your head. Those are bunny heads, I guess, from Japan. Let's jump in. Where do you come from? Come from France. Anybody from France? Yeah, excellent. A few out there. So I was born there back in the 70s, so quite a while back. I was born in the countryside, a little city called Châtellerault that you most likely have never heard of, but we call that the Midwest. So just sets the bar out there. This is counts as both a cute picture and myself, I guess. Out there, I was born with brother and sisters doing silly things, and for about 20 years or so, it was pretty normal, actually. Boring life of the countryside. These are some pictures of where I come from, just to give you an idea, and the kinds of cars that we were driving over there as well. Spent most of my life playing, stuff like normal kids, football, role-playing games. Amigas and Nintendo Entertainment System. Anybody got their hands on that one the other night? No? You got one? God damn it. I was in Lisbon. I couldn't get it. But anyway, when I was 13, I discovered the internet, maybe at 12 or so. And it was literally amazing, in many ways. Could fulfill a lot of the things I really liked about, Asia at large, anime and mangas and whatnot. And for some reason, I became, an actually red beret in the army. So that's quite bizarre, right? I really liked sports. I really liked, for some reason, doing parachute jumping. Oh, this is he's almost going to jump, but getting into this kind of planes, doing crazy things. Found out that the army was not really my thing, but it was a funny experience nonetheless. So I went to law school, and I was in law school in Poitiers, which is the oldest law school in France. It was a lot of fun. We started, I don't know in what year you guys are, but generally the French university starts with a lot of people. It's a public university. I think the tuition over there was about $100 a year. So you start with 1,000 people, but you end up with 10 that graduates actually out there. So that was the actual MP theater at the end of the 4 years. Of law, it's a bit different than in the US out there. You actually do law. I studied business law, which I thought would be pretty useless actually, because I didn't want to become a lawyer. But turned out it will be very useful, maybe 10 or 15 years later. That was Poitiers here, so pretty cool European little places out there. So went into law, also found it interesting. But one of the most interesting things that happened at the same time was that I was actually a reporter in the local newspaper out there. So it was my press card that allowed me to go to concerts and other things that I was not supposed to go to backstage. And it was a lot of fun, but it was not my first job. I was probably 18 or 19 when I got there. But it was certainly a job that will actually create connections through people that will be very important in the future. I also started to travel quite a bit. Back then it was actually a little bit crazy to go to China. It was back in the 1990s. So I traveled during summers. I was trying to get good grades so that I didn't have to go to the September exams and live in summer, use that little money that I made to go visit China. And I went really far, taking trains for 48 hours type of thing, exploring a bit of China and Asia. And decided that I would actually go there to study a bit more what was going on. So I went to another school, which was a master that sent me to China to actually learn Chinese and do other things out there. And it's not that crowded. It is actually pretty much. The interesting thing was that that very first connection that I made at the newspaper, for some reason I met someone who was at the board of directors of a really big company called Carrefour, which you may have heard of or not, but it's the second biggest retailer on the planet after Walmart. And for some reason, it was like I pinged him. It's like, hey, can I meet someone at Carrefour out there? I was like, yeah, okay. And I met straight the country manager, which was very, very lucky. Eventually, I got an internship in China. It was back in 2001, I think. And I got to actually build the first, believe it or not, the first e-commerce platform for retailers in China, period, at Carrefour, but also in China. It was very interesting because I started as a clerk. Carrefours in China are huge. They have about 1,000 people per store. And I started as a clerk, and then I proposed to the boss of the store to build. Hey, can we actually start delivering things? It was kind of my first little venture, from the inside. Did other things interesting in relationship with the Olympics. But anyway, after about a year of doing that and building a team for about, I think, 12 or 13 people, I actually moved on to another company called Air France that I'm sure you guys have heard of this time. So it's in the travel space, and it was in Beijing as well. So I stayed in Beijing back then. And this is me doing some silly things with people here. But I started again with the e-commerce. So I was in charge of the e-commerce. It was more of this time a regular job. And I had several opportunities. The interesting thing about going to China at that time, and I think going to many other countries like you guys will do in the future, is to seize opportunities and seize new kind of things when you have kind of the white card, because there is nobody else around to do things or to propose things or just be a force of initiative. And so at France, I was in charge of e-commerce, but very quickly actually took over another project that was going on. So companies are expanding, and you just raise your hand. This one was about building a sales and service center, which is kind of it starts with a call center and then it evolves into departments for following up legals or following up marketing and whatnot. And that led me to go to Guangzhou, so south of China, to build a new center. And I was wearing Taz at that time. That's terrible. And to start something new. And we started with, I think, 9 people. This was me with some of the staff. We reintegrated things with KLM and whatnot at that time. We grew to about, I think, 70 people in about a year and a half, which was an interesting experiment as a manager, as me making sure people do their things, careful out there, and managing a large team actually. So recruiting it and managing it from scratch. This time, again, kind of like an entrepreneur type of thing, because my boss was somewhere else in Beijing. So all that was fun, but I actually wanted to experience new things. So I decided to leave for Japan straight out of the blue. Just wanted to do something new, discover something new. So literally quit my job and went to Japan. It was pretty crazy. I was managing a lot of people, obviously, but do what you want. So I went there, and after a little bit of time in trying to learn how to speak Japanese this time, I ultimately, this was my apartment in Tokyo. That's I think the only room. It was about 20 square meters. Japan, small, but cool. I found a job actually at an agency called TBWA. This one was called Tequila. Which is specialized in direct marketing. It's a pretty big agency. TBWA is the agency of Apple and Adidas and whatnot. And we were doing direct marketing, CRM, and mobile marketing, which is the reason why I went to Japan at the first place. This was pre-iPhone stuff. And it was a lot of fun. I actually got dispatched at Nissan for about a year. This was the previous headquarters of Nissan in Tokyo, where I worked on putting essentially every guidelines and every tools for all the emerging markets for everything that is online and CRM and mobile marketing and whatnot. Pretty interesting job. Lots of travels. That was me with long hairs back then, and also I needed to wear coats and whatnot. And of course, it was Japan, so lots of cosplays here and cosplays there. Yay! This was Tokyo Game Show. If you ever want to go there. Anyway, that led me to travel all over the world, literally, because I was I think overviewing about 140 countries. This was in Aguascalientes in Mexico. A little later, training people and putting them up to speed with new tools that we were creating. Just some pictures of Japan, if you have never been there. It's also crowded, and people work late. It's pretty cool. This is Fuji Rock, which is a pretty big thing to go. It's a big concert. It's very nice. This is Japan. Anyway, and of course, samurai armors, because that's how they roll. Interestingly, I actually went back to China, and I'll keep on this one. Chinchilla are really cute. Went back to China because the agency I was working with actually needed to create a new kind of agency for a Pan-Asian group, and so we were working with Johnson & Johnson and a few others on what we call through the line, which is the marketing and advertising all in one. So building a new kind of agency. It had to be a Pan-Asian, and bizarrely, the best place that existed in to do that was in a city called Dalian in China. Dalian has a strong history and a strong basis for Korean and Japanese speakers, and so it was kind of the perfect delta. It's right by North Korea up there, a bit scary sometimes. It's also a pretty nice city, and so I had the opportunity to just go there, start an agency from scratch, which actually I was living nearby, but there's also very crowded beaches, as you can tell, and started a new agency called eGraphics Communications out there. We started with 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 people again, and after a year, we were, I think, 60 people. So it grew pretty fast. We had lots of clients worldwide. Was pretty fun. So the story goes as this: go back to Italian, or back to China. Essentially, go to Italian, build a fancy office because it's advertising, and it was pretty unusual to do that. This Italian, by the way, has horses and policemen on horses. And the interesting part is that at that time, someone came to my office because I actually built a fancy office, which meant essentially removing the ceiling and painting it in black. So somewhat creative, but not too much. I'm not a designer in heart, but still. And over there, actually, an entrepreneur came over. He's on the right up there. That's my right, yeah. Sean O'Sullivan. And happens that Sean was actually a pretty crazy entrepreneur turned venture investor. He came over because he was building a new company. He came over to see if how my ceiling looked like, and I was like, okay, let's have a coffee or something, because we don't have that many people coming over the office that often. And this is actually us playing a rock band. I guess everybody play rock band, right? And so I didn't know him too well. There was nothing about him online, so I just fired up. He came over and we played, fire up rock band. He was like, oh yeah, Harmonix, the guys are creating rock band. I was the first investor in that company, and so he immediately became my idol. And turns out he was the biggest investor in the company that got sold to Viacom for I think $240 million or something a little later. And Sean was quite kind of a great encounter because he built public companies. He's the creator of the term cloud computing, for example. He created the concept of having a map on a computer that I'm sure you are using on your phone every day, and many other things. And he was angel investing from time to time, but wanted to beef up a bit his venture team. And for many years, I've been incubating startups inside of the agency, but the agency was not very interested in actually doing that. And we decided together to actually build the first accelerator program in China back in 2008 or something like that, I guess. There was our office back then. So that's in Shanghai. And that was pretty cool ride. So we've built exactly what it is. It was an accelerator for software companies in China. We wanted to accelerate their development, and that led me to actually start to travel in the US and to formalize our fund, which will be a $70 million fund over 5 years that we will be investing, part in China and part in the US. And so I started to actually invest in the US bizarrely in some companies, for example, in some of them in hardware, like Formlabs that does 3D printing, Leap Motion that is doing gestural control, etc. And essentially working with hardware companies back then was the beginning of the understanding of the complexity of what is a supply chain and actually taking products to market. So I took a trip to Shenzhen, and over there I met very interesting people, including the guy over there, Zach. Here he goes. Zach was the founder of MakerBot. You guys have heard of MakerBot? So Zach founded the company and built the machine. He was the CTO over there. MakerBot got sold for $600 million about 3 years ago. And together we started Hacks. And he will take care of essentially the design for the companies to come over, and I will be taking care of everything else in the program and whatnot. So the idea of Hacks was, hey, we put ourselves in Shenzhen, and we get companies to accelerate their development. Why? Because actually what you want is a place where you can build products that will eventually scale, and you can do that faster. And I'll tell you a bit more afterwards about those concepts, but essentially, yeah, we started to build that. A lot of things happening, and cute animals, and I'm going to switch the presentation to another one to tell you what happened in the last 5 years, essentially, more or less. This is us with Salcan. So you've used the Khan Academy, or you've heard of it. We were the first backers of the Khan Academy at the very beginning of it, just to tell you a bit of the crazy things that can happen, essentially, and that was 5 years ago, and what you can do in 5 years. So that's the second part here. So what can you do in 5 years once you start with a $70 million fund? And it was essentially myself and Sean over there. So this has evolved quite a bit. So I'll just show you kind of the results of 5 years in. But what we've done is we've built a new kind of venture firm that will integrate the accelerator with a seed fund and even beyond, essentially. We've always been doing that for the past 5 or 6 years, but we formalized it, and we've also decided to attack new verticals over time. So some of the results after 5 years, we've built a hardware, of course, accelerator Hacks, a life sciences one called IndieBio, which is in San Francisco. China Accelerator is still there, and another one called FoodX out there. This is just some ideas about where the funders are coming from. We invested, I think, in 700 companies over the last 5 years, and we are the biggest investor in life sciences and biggest investors in hardware as well out there. Hacks has evolved quite a bit since I started it, and this is kind of the results of it, essentially, to give you an idea. The original idea was that, hey, building a hardware company is hard. How can we make that more efficient and easier? It turns out that you need to build a village in order to get by, but you'll need also to leverage the best parts and the best places in the world to actually do so. I think all of you have been, using lots of hardware devices over the past few years. There is a lot of impact coming out of it, and hardware is really large, right? It can go from robotics to machines to the consumer electronics things that you may buy, for Christmas. So what we've done is built essentially the most active firm out there in hardware startups. By now we are a team of about 35. So again, moved from 1 to 35 in the last 5 years. SOS Ventures now is a team of about 80 people worldwide. We have 8 partners covering the entire world. We have a team in Europe as well. Hacks itself has invested in over 180 companies over the past 5 years. This is actually our old office out there in Shenzhen, with people productizing things. Most of the startups are coming from the US. We send them for 3 months and a half in Shenzhen. And then we launch them in the US. 20% are from Europe, 30% from Asia, and 50-50 in terms of B2C and B2B approach here. And we've also developed 2 accelerators. One is about the productization, prototyping to launch. The other one is about the product to scale, which is in San Francisco, and why I'm here today is because I moved here about 2 years ago. And one is to go from 0 to 1, and the other one 1 to N. We cover a wide range of companies in consumer electronics, in health, in robotics, infrastructure, fabrication. And we've obviously invested in all of them and tried to support all of them out there. Those are some of the companies, but obviously there are lots of them. One of the things that people know us about is crowdfunding. We've been using that mainly as a marketing tool, and we've done 10 Kickstarter of the whole time 100 out there, more than 70 campaigns. I think we have 5 campaigns live just on any given moment out there. And lots of stories about Kickstarter and crowdfunding and how the companies move forward. Again, we use it as a marketing tool, but we also have proof, and that's perhaps the most interesting thing that I guess we've done is to prove that a company can go from Kickstarter to profitability. It's pretty fascinating. We have from the very first year a company called MakeBlock that does some kind of electronic kits for kids that also does nowadays consumer robotics. That moved essentially from what was a very humble $180,000 on Kickstarter roughly 4 years ago to a company that employs 280 employees, has well over $30 million in sales, and has always been profitable. It's always they raised eventually money from a VC, Sequoia, but they never even touched it. They never even had a line of credit from a bank. They just bankrolled themselves with sales from a Kickstarter. So why is it interesting? Well, it proves that, and one of the reasons why actually I went into hardware is because everything that I've built before, I essentially had a very tight budget to turn it to profitability and to growing it essentially. And hardware companies were interesting for that is. And that's kind of the whole concept about hacks is can we actually turn entrepreneurship into something predictable? It's possible that if you take those steps, you will actually be successful. Slowly but surely, we have stats that are proving that you can definitely improve the odds for a startup. I think it's also true with smaller companies, but it's fairly interesting to think about. How do we do that? Well, we have several assets. The first one is China and the supply chain, essentially. One of the reasons that we decided to be there, and this is some shots of the electronics markets, where actually our office is inside of an electronic market. This is how far we went, is to benefit from the flexibility, the scale, and the speed about what you can leverage. And essentially, people think about China as a savings thing most of the time, but that's actually the old thinking. The old thinking was, hey, I have my product, I've done X of them, and I throw them against, throw them on the other side, and some people come up with 1 million of them. That only works with really big companies, and it barely works actually, considering most big companies are developing in China as well. For startups, savings, it's not about actually having assembly jobs, behind the lines that big companies can leverage. It doesn't mean anything. A startup is going to build, at most 100,000 units its first year, probably a lot less. So what matters is the faculty to move from a prototype to an actual product. It's actually moving from, when you think about it, people are always thinking that, hey, I have my prototype and that's the one, and I can go on. But actually, the reality is that most people have something that went from 0 to 0.1, and that's the prototype. It means that there are still 9 steps to go from 0.9 to an actual one that you can scale and replicate. And the difference here is about essentially speed, flexibility, ordering something on a Friday night and getting it on Sunday morning. Impossible elsewhere on the planet, but over there, no problem. And scale. If you build a robot and you have 10,000 pieces inside of it that you need to CNC, well, it's going to cost you a lot of money to do that elsewhere. But here you can use the actual scale of the supply chain that has been built by Apple and Samsung and everybody else. And it's kind of the long tail that you are using to your advantage to CNC 10,000 parts in just a week, and so that you can test your robot and move on And guess what? The cost of your entire thing is going to be also a lot smaller than if you try to do that elsewhere. And we're still talking about prototyping. So it makes even more sense if you are building a large thing to actually prototype in China, which is very counterintuitive, but it's something that we've learned over the years. Content, with Zach, we've actually redesigned the way things are built, and by leveraging the supply chain around. So the origin, we were thinking about having a workshop and whatnot over there, but it turns out it was pretty useless because the entire city is the workshop. So what we had to do was to focus on design. And if you go to our office nowadays, what you will see is an actual conveyor belt and an assembly line, which means that the way we design things or redesign things or productize them is by starting from the end, because at the end of the day, building a hardware company will require someone to build it for you. And that's perhaps one of the biggest learnings about what it takes to build one. And over the years, we've built lots of expertise. We have the person running the accelerator nowadays in Shenzhen came from IDEO, and the whole team that worked at Apple and whatnot to actually help the companies move faster forward. Some of the teams that we will pick out there generally have a 10x advantage. All this is pretty obvious. That's what most investors will look into. But the advantages in hardware can be in many places. Sometimes it's in science, but not always. Often it's in software, and sometimes in community and whatnot. Why does it matter? Well, if you're building a hardware startup, you better be fast. Because there are lots of movement. Again, today, yesterday was launched the Snapchat spectacles, and even Lyft has now a piece of hardware in the car. So actually, a lot of companies are moving their software into hardware. Some others are going the other way around, and for those of you who have heard about Xiaomi, we've created the term Xiaomization, which is beyond commoditization. It's really literally taking another business model and applying it to hardware and cutting the cost because you can make it up somewhere. And this is one of the drones that has been launched recently by them. So things are going really fast, and things become commoditized very quickly out there. Finally, our community. Actually, we moved from 15 to 30 now. What's going on? There are about 100 founders inside of the office at any given time. Our office, I think, has 250 people inside of it today, because the alumni network is really big and there are lots of things happening anyway. If you want to read more about hacks in general, and if you're interested in hardware startups, you can look at a Wired document on it. It's very interesting about Shenzhen. We also write a lot of stuff on TechCrunch and whatnot. All right, so 5 years later, this is what happened. What is there to learn? A few things, actually, that I learned along the way. So first of all, you won't make it alone. And we all think we're super duper smart, and every time we do something, we think that it's coming from us, from ourselves, essentially, and whatnot. But the reality is that whatever you do, you will always work with other people, including if it's your staff or your colleagues, or I think more importantly, your mentors. And so if there is only one thing you must remember from today's encounter, is that you need to find mentors. I think it's probably said somewhere during your curriculum that you need to find the people to help you out. But I think it's actually going to define a lot of the things that you will do. Some of which will be professional, some of which will be personal. But there is no doubt that throughout the journey that I've had so far, and by now I have invested in over 300 companies and whatnot. Those people have been very important, and there are many more, but they've been literally gravitating around me. Remy out there for example, is the one that convinced me to move to Japan because he was there and he will eventually become my client at Nissan. Just to give you an idea. Frederick was at Air France, gave me the opportunity to actually do whatever I wanted, which is not necessarily that easy. Sometimes your boss can be good and sometimes pretty terrible, but there is genius in being terrible sometimes, or there are lessons to be learned when people are terrible. But in this case, it's like do whatever you want. It's like sounds crazy, but it worked. Keiichi Funaki was like. I was like, I was in Japan. It was not easy, right, to move back to China, and I was like, oh, actually, it's a tremendous opportunity for you. You will create this, and you will be able to do that. And so it convinced me to go back to China. Eventually, from Dalian to Shenzhen, I moved to San Francisco 2 years ago. There was, if I would not have been back to Dalian, I would certainly not be here today. I'll be, somewhere else. Or Pierre out there, who was at Carrefour, and because I had such a good introduction into the company, and this guy was managing the country, literally, I was supposed to get an internship. First of all, I just came from graduating in business law and all that. I was like, oh, I'm gonna have that nice little headquarter experience in a foreign country where I could hide behind my desk. And the guy saw that immediately. He was like, yeah, that's you could actually write a report on sustainability about in China, and you're gonna spend the next year literally behind a desk over there, or I can send you to a store and you can learn about life and how a store actually works. And I was like, yeah, okay, sounds like the store is a better option. And it was way more difficult because you arrive in the store and nobody speaks English, and you have to go at it and figure things out. But those people are tremendous. So keep that in mind when you meet some, and when some become they're not always your boss, but they often are. They'll make you better and help you along the way. Second, happiness is overrated. Sorry, if you're not that happy all the time, or if you are not going to be happy. It's about the bar that you set for yourselves, but it's especially about purpose. Happiness is very emotionally led, essentially. It's the things that make you feel good, but what you learn over time is that things that make you feel good are actually just limited in time. But purpose is what makes you go at it every morning and move on and complete yourself. So there is a whole journey about what's inside of you that is important, and that will last for all your life. But if you can keep in mind that just wanting to be happy is not a thing. But actually finding a purpose will be great because that's what will eventually make you happy. And finally, I want to leave you with a thought before we go into Q&A about something that I call augmenting your personality. I've obviously, so I spent, I think, 17 years abroad by now. I barely go back to France. I spent, I think, there was a time I didn't go back to France for 7 years at all. The first years I was going back every 3 months, and then every 6 months, and every year. Then at some point, it just vanished. Obviously, I have 2 kids now and whatnot. So lots of life events that take you into it, and also moved. In 7 cities in 15 years, and I've lived, I think, in 15 places over time. So, lots of life events makes you, sometimes never go back to your country. Be warned. What was interesting is that, when you meet with people, and I'm sure a lot of you are lived abroad or been abroad by now, there is some kind of baggage about where you come from. Sometimes it can, of course, be lots of prejudices and whatnot. But in particular, people will think that whoever you are defines you 100%, right? I kind of struggled with that, being French. It comes with a lot of things, including not being an entrepreneur. That starts there clearly, but there are lots of other things attached with being from certain countries, and because of that, it was very easy earlier to be like, oh, okay, I've lived abroad for quite some time, so I'm not entirely French anymore. And I'm sure some of you had that thought, but yeah, I'm not really from that country. And actually, well, I'm more like 50% this, and I'm more like something that. And I found it was quite kind of reductory, because you are trying to cut yourself from something, which is actually your roots for the most part, and which is actually probably not true. So I came out with this thing a few years ago, which is about what you are. And depending on where you've lived, essentially in the cultures you've been exposed to, I think is much more interesting, because it completes you in a way. There is no doubt that I'm at the end of the day 100% French. I'm eating cheese, I'm drinking wine, I'm playing football, and the usual spiel that is still inside of me. But there is also no doubt that I've been impregnated by other cultures. Lived 10 years in China. My kids were born in China. My wife's Chinese. We lived in Japan together for a long time. I'm becoming American by the day, and my kids are even more American sometimes than myself, or will become over time. Also lived a year on the plane and whatnot. So augmenting yourself, I think, is more interesting than degrading yourself in a way, or trying to get away from your culture or whatever, your country, or making yourself look different. Maybe use that methodology if you like it, to express yourself, and also keep on learning essentially, and be aware that you can speak so many different languages and go to so many different cultures and do so many different things in life that is mind-boggling. Become 200% time yourself, or 500% time yourself in the future. Could be an objective. It's certainly one of mine. This is about it. Thank you.
All right. Are there any questions?
Hey, Cyril. My name is Pranav. Thank you so much for coming here. You have a really inspirational story. I'm also an international student, so I kind of understand the mix of cultures. But what I wanted to ask you was actually, how do you allow people to transcend their ideas of you as a person of a different culture and allow you to mix with them at a deeper level?
Can you be more precise?
So just from your experience in China, how could you, or how long did it take you to really start mingling with the culture and
Sure.
treating it like your own?
Yeah, there is no doubt that it's difficult to become part of it, and especially in certain cultures are not very inclusive. I guess the step one for every single places you go is to talk the language, it gives you not only the street creds, but it gives you an insight about how people think. So it started by learning Chinese or learning Japanese was always the first step I've done, including the kanji or the Chinese characters. And one of the reasons to learn that is because it's really deep insights about how people think about things. Tell you a little story about that, I guess. The first time I came to China, so when I went back, to become an intern, I studied Chinese in France for about 6 months, and I had some kind of beginner/intermediate level, which was kind of okay to get by, or so I thought. So I arrived in literally the first day at the dormitory, since we were still students. I just go out of the dormitory, I go see a bus stop. It was in Shanghai. And I look at it, I was like, this is going to be a lot more complicated than I thought. I literally had no idea about anything because I didn't practice that language. And obviously, if you speak many languages, you will know that if you haven't been to the country, it's very difficult. But so I just hopped on the bus, and it took me somewhere, and I had to ask about things, and it was kind of ridiculous. And so a year later, I was literally I probably took every single buses line possible in Shanghai and Beijing. And for the first time that I was moving out of China, I remember that there was like about 30 people waiting for a bus, and I was waiting for a bus. And someone comes to me, obviously Chinese, and asked me for the direction to go to a certain place. And I had the answer to that, but it was pretty bizarre that they would be asking me. So it got me thinking that I got to the perfect integration at some point, of people looking for some reason asking me about that, and being capable of answering that question accordingly. So I guess it takes effort, and a lot of them in blending with the culture, while of course trying to remain as much as possible yourself. Japan was also pretty humbling in that regard. But there is no doubt that you can. Japan was fabulous. I had like China, lots of friends and lots of weddings and lots of this and lots of that. So if you make efforts, you will blend in eventually, and people will forget that you are a foreigner.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jenny. I come from China, and thank you for sharing your experience with us. You said one of the biggest takeaway for us is to find a mentor. And my question is that how do you find a mentor? Or do you have any
I was thinking
tips?
about it when I was putting this online. It's quite strange because it sounds like a lot of it is down to luck eventually, but I'm not sure it's entirely true. For example, Remy that I was describing that essentially I worked with him in Japan came from my student network. He was one of the alums. France doesn't have systems which are as good as what is in Berkeley, for example, where there is actually a strong will to help previous generations, but there is a good chance that your first mentors will come from people who have been part of Berkeley in many ways. So use that network extensively and meet with people. Eventually, I don't know what with the others. They were part of the most of the time of the corporate encounter, as in the people that will actually hire you, and it's about developing a relationship with them. So I got to think that some were like Sean coming over to check whether my ceiling were painted in black is pretty silly. So it's a mix of at the end of the day of I think being somewhat inquiring your network in general and becoming social, and I think there are affinities with mentors that you just becomes obvious, or sometimes it will just become obvious over time that they are here to help you out. It's hard to ask for help. Yeah, help me become a mentor doesn't seem to work. So it's probably a mix of what's inside of you and inside of them that makes it click. And keep in mind there are many types of mentors. Again, there are some that will have great personal advices, and some others that will become great people to take you through career development.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mark. Thanks for talking. I appreciate it. Just real quickly, how many languages do you know?
5. Speak French, English, German, Japanese, and Chinese.
That's awesome. But yeah, so real question. So it seems like it's hard to keep your attention, like you're moving France, everywhere. So what exactly, what do you think is the next 5 years look like?
Yeah, it's a bit of ADHD for sure. It's becoming harder over the years with kids to move, so there is that. But I draw the parallel with it's funny, with my parents actually, who my dad was, I didn't explain that, I guess, but Obviously, we come from a very modest family. My mom was taking care of us, and my dad was creating telecom towers throughout France, back in the 60s and 70s. And they were moving in caravans with my brother and sister for a long, long time. So I'm kind of the same, gypsy spirit of going around, except it's at the worldwide level. So I try to keep that actually in the family. It's important, I think. We are a very international family anyway by now. But keeping the idea that you could move anytime, anywhere is cool. It's something that I really want to do. So I need to learn Spanish. It sounds obvious now. So maybe at some point we'll go to a Spanish speaking country. But what's next for Hacks is actually, or for SOSV at large, since we've been at it for about 5 years. When you invest in companies, it takes about a decade to go through one cycle of investments. We'll have invested, I think, $250 million by then. And seeing a cycle is what does that mean? That means that you invested in a company 10 years ago. Some of them are dead, unfortunately, and some others have succeeded. And the key is that what do you do with that? Well, you can have another cycle and try to make things better, improve the odds for those companies to grow. At the moment, I'm mainly working on actually the last phase, because I've done the productization, we've done the sales and marketing piece of it. So I'm actually working on what does it take to take a company public, essentially from the very beginning to the end. It sounds very outrageously ambitious, but actually, again, when I described that one company and many others that literally moved from Kickstarter to dozens of millions in sales, is not that crazy. And I think there is an interesting parallel. So again, pardon me, but coming from France, we have a mix of socialism and capitalism inside of us, and the idea that there is no doubt that I think entrepreneurship is actually what makes society better, because it does create jobs and it creates relationships between people, and the more entrepreneurs, the merrier. But there is definitely another parallel that is going on. It's about how to share growth, and I think the past 20 years have been pretty disappointing, actually, for the regular people, which most likely includes most of us here, in order to participate to the growth of companies that become public companies. And there has been that kind of fight between, hey, we need to build very big companies that go public, but guess what? None of us can buy shares until it actually goes public, and it's already a $100 billion valuation. And the real mechanism of the stock market, has been created to actually make sure that the wealth is spread across the entire country. So I'm kind of trying to study the impact of crowdfunding, and of course there is some other things like called crowd equity investing that some of you may have seen, that is interesting. And so can you go from crowdfunding, which is a very essential social mechanism to actually fund companies to become real, and there is no doubt that people have who has backed Kickstarter campaigns in the past? 1, 2, 3. Come on, guys. There's no doubt that people that are actually backing Kickstarter campaigns are making those companies possible. That's been done over and over again. Sometimes in conjunction with venture funding, but more often not, actually. And some will grow, and I see them go public because that's the story, right? It's actually something that started, that was supported by people. And it's something that will grow supported by people. There are some struggle in between, because the venture funding model actually wants companies to grow to billion-dollar companies and does not reward an entrepreneur creating a company that does $50 million in sales every year, which is pretty silly. So that's what I'm busy with, and I think it's going to take me 5 years to explore that entirely. Hacks in 5 years, we probably have about 800 companies on the portfolio. I think we'll have many, many billions in revenue, and hopefully we'll have cracked that. Can we go from zero to IPO in 4 or 5 years by growing a sustainable company, and can we have everybody share the wealth? So I might go to New York.
Yeah. So I think we'll stop it there, and then you guys can come up and ask questions and talk up here on stage. And yeah, so let's give them a round of applause.
Thanks a lot, guys.